Morning, everybody. I'm sure you're used to this by now, particularly if this is not the first session at the language show that you've arrived at. It takes a couple of minutes, a good couple of minutes to get everybody into the Zoom room. So say hi in the chat, say where you're joining us from this morning. If we keep the chat for that, that seems to make sense. Use the Q&A for any questions about the session. I'm going to do my absolute best. I did okay yesterday, not so well on Friday, but okay yesterday with having enough time to pick up the questions that were in the Q&A. So I won't have time to see the chat once the session starts. So keep that just for saying hello as you come in now, and then put the questions in the Q&A if there are any, and I'll try and get those. It's nice to know where people are coming from. Oh, sunny Cardiff. It's not very sunny where I am, I have to say. Rheinberg in Germany, yay! And Milan in Italy. Oh, this is where you feel the excitement of Zoom and online events. Bournemouth, Cambridgeshire. Hi, Sam. Great to see everybody. Slovakia. Hi, Rennie. Brill. Okay, we'll give it one more minute, and then we'll make a start. I need to get rid of that now. Okay. Right, I think we'll kick off. You can never quite tell when you're full because people will obviously be able to get this on catch up. We have an idea of how many people have registered, but lots of people won't be coming and joining us live this morning, so, or this afternoon, or this lunchtime. So I'll get started. Morning, everyone. Morning. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. My name's Rachel Hawkes. I work for the Cam Academy Trust 1 day a week, and I am seconded from that job for 4 days a week at the moment, quite a lot, to work as co-director at NSELP. NSELP stands for the National Centre for Excellence for Language Pedagogy. We're going to talk about asking questions, teaching students how to ask and answer questions in this session. I'm going to draw on resources that are freely available. I'll signpost where they are at the end of the session. There are primary resources that are available on my website, and there are secondary resources that are available on the NSELP website. I want to thank everybody that I work with in the NSELP team, but also in my school. And because she's not part of my school, I'll give a quick shout out to Marie-Odile Guillou, who is working in particular with me on the French resources, and those resources feature in this session. So a shout out to her. Okay, well, let's get started. This looks a little bit daunting as our session overview, but I'm going to keep bringing this back to keep us on track and remind us what we're talking about. We're going to start off by looking at what curriculum policy has to say about asking and answering questions at the different phases. So here we have the Key Stage 2 programme of study. This is the primary programme of study. I've condensed it into note form, but nothing's omitted. And we can easily see here the requirement that students are taught to ask and answer questions. So we start early with that. Moving on to Key Stage 3, and if you don't work in this country, that's age 11 to 14. And here we have the National Curriculum for Languages aims for speaking as set out in the Key Stage 3 programme of study. And we can see there that it also mentions asking questions. It's important to note, I think, that we often associate questions with speaking, in particular, for obvious reasons. But we must remember that forming questions is a is a function that goes across all of the modes and modalities. So we need to be able to understand written questions. We need to be able to understand questions that we hear. We need to be able to form questions, obviously, in our speaking, but we also need to be able to form them when we engage in written communication. So we mustn't get too siloed with questions as only connected to speaking. Just a quick note on the new subject content proposed for the GCSE. It talks about using spoken language productively for a range of purposes, including informal contexts that are relevant to students' needs and interests. Now, to me, I read that as some sort of conversational spoken interaction with questions and answers. Now, later on in the document, in the proposals, it talks about undertaking role play, simulating a context such as a social conversation and answering questions about a visual stimulus, for example, a photograph. Now, we might argue that it could be clearer on the whole issue of questions, and maybe the final version will be whenever that appears. But whatever the case, it's clear if we look now at the grammar appendices in the proposed new content that we are expected to teach and students are expected to learn how to use questions. So, and I think these grammar appendices are worth a look, actually, because there's more detail in them than we've ever had previously in other versions of the subject content and the grammar appendices. So here you can see that not only are we told that we're going to need to use interrogatives, but that we also have a list of the types of question. So I'll just look at the French one because it's got the most variety in terms of question types. We've got here intonation questions with subject, verb, word order. And then in addition to that, subject, verb, word order, intonation questions, which have a tagged on question word. And that question word could be either at the front or at the end, as we know. And then we've got question word followed by est que, or we've just got est que by itself with subject, verb, word order. And then we've also got question word followed by verb, subject, word order. Quite a lot to think about there, but at least it is very, very clear that all of these question types could come up and students are expected to know how to use them. And that means using them in their understanding and using them in their production in speaking and writing, as we've said. Okay, so that's so much so then for the curriculum policy. We can see that questions are in it right the way from Key Stage 2 and will be important up to Key Stage 4. I want to just have a little think about student motivation. And I wish I had done more research on this, but I haven't done any research specifically exploring a potential connection between motivation and the ability to ask questions in the target language. But going back quite a few years now, I did gather some student responses to a short questionnaire about unplanned speaking. And we asked around nearly 300 students aged 11 to 15. We asked them some questions about unplanned speaking. And this was one of the questions we asked. And in the responses, it was clear that students associate unprepared, unwritten questions with spontaneity. So their answers highlighted all of these things: lack of prior preparation, no written support, the immediacy of the experience, that it was very much like a conversation, and this one, that they did not know the questions or answers in advance. So very much this idea of unplanned, spontaneous questions. And then we asked a follow-up question: why do you think this unplanned speaking is an important focus in language learning? And students said things like this: you don't know what the other person is going to say in real life, and to make sure you definitely know it and are able to have conversations without reading off a sheet. So there is the suggestion here that students associate unplanned speaking with real life activity, and that they also think of it as what they really truly know. So not sort of cheating, if you like. It's what's genuinely in their heads and what they're genuinely able to use for real communication. And they also mentioned the link between spontaneous speaking and increased confidence. So whilst this wasn't absolutely directly about questions, I think there's a strong suggestion here that a degree of confidence in asking and answering questions may be motivational. Obviously, this relates to speaking in particular. And we can see that the ability, therefore, to initiate with a question, as well as the ability to respond readily to a question that you're asked, is a very, very much a part of that confident communication. Okay, so what are the issues then potentially in teaching at the moment that act as a barrier to getting students to ask questions with this confidence that we know they want? Well, let's start off by looking at some questions. I've put some French questions at the bottom there. Could you, having said we're not going to use the chat, actually I've changed my mind. Let's use it. Could you say how many different types of questions you can see, as in, don't give me a number and say 5 types, but actually type in the type of question that you can see here and put that in the chat. I'll just give people a couple of minutes to think about that one. What sorts of questions, if we think back to what we just saw in terms of the proposed subject content when we analysed the French questions that were listed there. Just going to see if I can have a look at the chat. Okay, so we've got open and closed, verb, subject, inversion, subject, verb, intonation question. Yeah, okay. So it's easier to do this, obviously, if we map it out and list the types of questions that there are, but exactly as you've started to notice there, we'll just sort them out into different types. We've got intonation question, tu aimes le sport. We've got intonation question with a question word at the end. We've got an intonation question with a fronted question word at the front. We've got inversion, where the verb and subject swap around. And as people noticed, yes, closed question because it's a yes, no. And we've got an inversion question with a question word at the front. And we've got these two, which are slight variant on the ones we've had. So this is an intonation question with the question word at the end, but it's sort of got a dummy subject in there at the front. So c'est quand, and then the real subject, ton anniversaire, comes afterwards. And then we've got comment t'appelles-tu, which is an inversion question with an extra reflexive pronoun in it as well. And then, as if that weren't enough for French question types, we actually had two types of question that weren't represented here at all, the est-ce que and the est-ce que with question word that we didn't see represented. Now, the only way that students can learn these to use well in conversation all at once would be by memorizing them as set phrases. There's too much variety in this bunch of language here. If it's all presented at once, there's too much variety there in the formation for pupils to be able to spot a pattern that they could lock onto and then be creative with and break it down and apply to other words to make more questions like it. And so this is putting these questions here, if we're going to introduce them all at once, and these are all taken from one page in a Year 7 textbook from term 1, this would be memorization rather than internalization and creativity. And I think to say that this is an issue, I think it is, and I think this is part of what the pedagogy review was talking about when it says that sometimes course books overlook the cumulative nature of grammatical structures and present too much that's disparate all at once on the page, and that students would get confused if they were actually trying to use these creatively and manipulate them. They wouldn't really be able to manipulate them. They'd need to just sort of swallow them whole. Okay, so I think then that an antidote to that is to think really carefully about how we sequence the teaching. And here we're talking about questions, but the idea and the concept behind this applies to any linguistic feature. So I think, you know, all this to suggest really that pupils can benefit if we do some pre-planning and we sequence the teaching of questions in the same way as we might be inclined to sequence the teaching of any other linguistic content. So we think really carefully about how many patterns to present and in which order. And then we teach them sequentially, giving pupils ample practice time to develop the confidence with understanding and producing each pattern. And then we help them apply it to different words across different contexts so that they truly are able to create questions by themselves. And the Pedagogy Review had a sort of roadmap about how you might do that. So it suggests that for, not specifically for questions, but for every new grammatical feature, you might, first of all, give a very short, succinct explanation of what is going on. And then you would practice it, give ample practice in understanding it, in listening and reading. Then you might do some structured practice in speaking and writing to focus all of their attention on the new feature. That would lead then into some freer practice, but always bearing in mind that in unplanned speaking, there's still very likely to be a level of error just because of that. The lack of thinking time really puts a burden on the working memory and means that errors will sneak out, and that those should be treated very sensitively, particularly when practicing speaking in an unplanned context. So if we want to see this in action, let's look at how that might roll out. And for this, I've taken a primary scheme of work to look at how this might roll out from the beginning in French at Key Stage 2. At lower Key Stage 2, we might start, so lower Key Stage 2 for anyone not in the British context, that's age 7, might start with raised intonation questions. Why would we start with those? Why wouldn't we just go straight in with your inversion questions? Well, essentially because the first thing that pupils are going to learn in terms of a sentence pattern is that basic sentence structure of subject, verb, object, subject, verb, whatever else comes afterwards. And so intonation questions, excuse me, is exactly the same. It mirrors that basic pattern that they will already have learnt in sentences, but there's the difference that the intonation goes up at the end to denote a question. And notice here that when we start off, we've also thought quite carefully about this. So we're working with être to start off with, so that instead of the do you cross-linguistic difficulty that we get with English, it is slightly more straightforward in that with être, with the verb to be, it's simply a matter of syntax. So the English is an inverted version of the French. So for example, je suis is actually in English, am I, as a question. Tu es is are you. So French keeps the words in the same order, English swaps the words round, but we don't add this extra do that doesn't convert so easily and doesn't translate into anything at all in the foreign language. Okay, so notice that we start in weeks. On the left-hand side, you can see that we're starting in week 3 with these raised intonation questions. By week 5, we're rolling it out with different lexis, with different parts of the verb. So instead of je suis, we're now doing il est, elle est with raised intonation questions. And then in week 6, we've also got c'est going on in a raised intonation question. And we carry on then into week 8 of term 1. We're now bringing in avoir. And here we introduce nouns and indefinite articles with avoir. And so the English that we use to translate that same pattern is different. So tu as un chien, actually quite straightforward in French, as this is the same pattern as tu es, well, you could say tu es un chien, but tu es drôle. But now we have different English that translates that. So now we get the do you have as opposed to are you funny? And the reason that I point this out is that we do need to consider for pupils the cross-linguistic differences with each new feature and each new element of each new feature, and be prepared to put in lots of practice activities that enables those features to be genuinely acquired and securely locked in. We can see that by the end of term 1, pupils have practiced raised intonation questions with the singular persons of être, so je, tu, il, elle, and the additional c'est. They've also practiced them with avoir, the je, the tu, the il, and the elle. And in addition, we've just started to add a question word to tag on to the end of a raised intonation question. So we start off with c'est quoi, what is it, or what is that? And then we extend this into tu as quoi, il a quoi, elle a quoi. And so I think you can see there relatively clearly that at least half of the weeks in the first term are focused on practicing question formation, but it's one formation type. Raised intonation questions, but practiced across a range of different verb persons with the 2 fundamental base verbs in the French language, avoir and être. And we start with activities in listening and reading. So this is where I want to have a look at input practice. And it's a very particular type of input practice. So it's not just hearing questions and understanding them globally. It's actually breaking them down so that we focus on the constituent parts. This is better demonstrated than talked about. So I'm going to go straight into, first of all, a short explanation of what a question is with some examples, and then the sorts of input practice that we use. Okay, so first of all, we've got the explicit explanation, telling pupils what to do to turn a statement that they know how to make into a question. And we start with the very simple one, ça va.
Ça va.
These are the primary resources that they're available, and I will show you where they are later. This is Marie-Odile. We have audio versions and we have non-audioed versions in case the teacher just wants to use their own voice. That's absolutely fine. You'll notice here that we've got, we're about to ask pupils what this means, but we've got also an indicator of where the voice goes down to show them that visually. And I think it's quite helpful, actually. I found it very helpful learning Chinese. I'm attempting to learn Chinese. I'm very bad at it, but I do find it extremely helpful to see the intonation and also to draw it with my hand physically. You may know that Chinese has got 5 tones, and actually saying it while you do something physically with your body is really helpful for cementing the sound patterns in your head. So we've got that pink line there showing you the intonation. We've also got, I'll show you this in a minute.
Ça va.
We've also got a short video clip showing the mouth shapes, and we have that for all of the phonics as well, because
Ça va.
And now we've got the voice going up.
Ça va.
And I think as well, you can see that it's helpful seeing a whole face. Actually, Marie-Odile's eyebrows go up when the questions are being asked.
Ça va bien. Ça va bien.
bien, bien.
Ça va bien? Ça va bien?
Okay, so you get the idea. And we've introduced these three. So ça va bien, ça va mal, and ça va. And obviously the key thing about primary is to have lots and lots of practice. So a scenario here where we're going to link this a little bit with phonics. So we're going to listen to, so our scenario is that our teacher, Madame Dior, likes asking rhyming questions. So we're going to listen to the name of the pupil she calls, and then we're going to anticipate which question she is going to ask that pupil. It's essentially a reading task, but it's also a reading aloud in your head task, because we're listening to the name.
Lucas.
We listen to Lucas, and what is the beep covering? What is it taking the place of? Is it Lucas, ça va? Lucas, ça va bien? Lucas, ça va mal? It's obviously going to be ça va, because that rhymes with Lucas.
Lucas, ça va?
Okay, you get the idea. Here we have.
Jocelyn.
Okay, and pupils needed to pick out from hearing Jocelyn that was going to rhyme with ça va bien, and then obviously they can practice it as well. Now we jump forward a little bit to week 5, and this is a listening activity. And by this stage, pupils have learnt the pronouns je, tu, il, and elle, and they've learnt the corresponding forms of être. So they know how to say I am, you are, he is, she is, and lots of adjectives. In previous weeks, we've practiced those in pairs, but in this revisiting activity, pupils have to identify the right person and also listen out for whether it's a statement or a question, for which they can only use the intonation that they hear. And then we also listen again for the adjective.
Il est amusant.
Okay, so they have to tick il, they have to tick he, to show that they've understood that il est amusant is he is. And then is it a statement with a full stop or a question? It's a statement.
1. Tu es grand?
Okay, so we're listening out. We have to recognize that that is you. We have to recognize that it's a question. And once we've done all of that, this is breaking that part down. We listen to it again, and we can obviously see how they are feeling, all of these people. And once you've got all of this information on the slide, you can obviously turn your speaking task and turn your answers from your speaking task into, from your listening task rather, into a speaking practice. So once you've got all of your answers on there, you can see that the example was amusant and amusing. So if you're going to do a statement that says he is amusing, il est amusant, is what the pupils would come out with. I'm going to move a little bit quicker now, but
J'ai un livre.
Just to say that every single time we do a variation on the pattern, it is important to lay it out very, very clearly.
Tu as un livre.
From statement to question.
Tu as un livre.
Okay, so our voice is going up at the end here, and we're reminding pupils that in English we add do. And obviously you can do this with a nice context. So here we have our two characters. Oh, this is our main character, Pierre, and his sister Adele often features too. And he's going on a school trip and he's preparing his bag, but he's got lots of questions about it. He's really not sure what he's got or what his friend has got. And they're trying to maximize the room by taking various things. Do I have this? Do you have this? Is the kind of conversation. These are all questions. So we're here, we're not listening out for whether it's a statement or a question. We're listening out for the parts of avoir. And in order that we focus on the very, very important bit of avoir, is it est or is it a? We've taken away the pronoun, because as soon as you hear the je, then you know that it's I, and you stop focusing on how that actually sounds just with the verb. So here we've got
A une orange.
Okay, so it's a question. Is he saying, do I have or do you have? Got to listen very hard to work that out, because it's the difference between a and e. But when pupils come to speak themselves, Quite obviously, they're not going to miss the pronouns out. And here we have listening again.
Tu as une orange?
So that we can hear the full question. And pupils can predict that once they've listened to all of the part sentences, they predict how these questions are going to go. And then we listen to the full questions in order to confirm whether they have got it right. So this is what I mean about focusing the activity so that it's exactly on the part of the feature that you want to practice. Here again, we've got either tu as this time, or il a, or elle a, in fact, because we're talking about Sophie. But what is hiding behind here, and how do we know? And then how do we know what they've got packed? So here we're practicing, first of all, connecting the pronoun with the part of avoir that it goes with. So here we've obviously got tu as un stylo, and we elicit all of these answers from pupils. And then what have they actually got in their bags? So Yves, tu as un stylo, he's got a pen, etc., etc. Okay. In moving into key stage 3 now, so we're talking age 11 to 14, and we're flipping languages into German. So this is the German NSELP scheme of work. Questions are practiced in 57%, it's quite precise, isn't it? 57% of all lessons practiced explicitly, and right from the beginning, with obviously the same idea, with a short explanation, and then really focusing on the feature. And German's different from French. So actually, the most important thing about yes/no questions in German is that the verb and the subject swap round. Of course, if we leave the intonation in as a question, you don't need to focus on the syntax. Pupils will miss the fact that the verb and the subject have swapped around, because they can hear that it's a question just from the voice going up at the end. And this is why we've engaged this strange character Zorg, who has very flat intonation, so that when we listen to him, the only way we can tell whether it's a question, a Frage, or a statement, is to hear, is to listen out for the position of the verb and subject in the sentence. If we were just doing this on intonation, we wouldn't have to focus on the syntax at all.
Macht es dort viel Spaß?
Okay, it sounds very, very flat, doesn't sound recognizably like a question, and yet it is a question because the verb comes first. Macht es dort viel Spaß? Macht es dort viel Spaß is what we would see. And obviously once all of the answers have been done, pupils can actually put the intonation back in to practice that voice going up. And then, obviously we will then do this in real conversations. We won't be practicing conversations where we have flat intonation. This is just very much at the beginning, when we're doing the input practice, to focus on the bits that learners find hardest. Here, I'll probably actually just move quickly on from this one, but this is differentiating between German questions where the verb is in the second place, and also word order 2 in statements where the verb is also in the second place, but following an adverbial time phrase. So you see that you can set up all sorts of contrasts to enable pupils to focus in the input on the structure. Then we're obviously going to want to produce questions. So structured production, back to French primary again. Here, a pupil will say 6 names, and the pupil B will be turning away from the board so that they can't see this. Pupil A says Madame Vidal. Pupil B listens out and responds with one of the 3 questions that we've been practicing. So either ça va mal, or ça va bien. It has to rhyme, so it's going to have to be ça va mal, but the pupil chooses whether they want to make it a question or a statement. So when they recognize what their partner has said, that it rhymes with mal, they are going to choose whether to keep their intonation as a statement flat or to raise it for a question. And then pupil A will note down what they have, what the question or the statement was, by putting a full stop or a question mark. So listening out very, very particularly for the questions there. And here we have names for pupil B. They swap roles and they do it again. So that's structured practice. It is essentially providing the roadmap for what pupils need to say, but it's contingent in the sense that the pupil listening doesn't know what's coming and they have to respond to what they hear. So in that sense, it does meet the criteria for real, authentic communication, because for me, that is, as pupils indicated in their survey, it's when you don't know what the questions and answers are in advance. And they don't know that in this scenario. So there is a reason for listening all the time. Here we've got creating questions, turning a statement.
Je suis ici.
Turning a statement into a question, just raising your voice at the end. Okay, so we give them a quick recap of that. We haven't seen this exact one before, but we have seen similar ones. So we're recapping all the time. And then half the class turns away from the board. This is a choral activity en classe. They turn away from the board. We give them an indicator here. It has to be a question. They are provided with the words, so they're just practicing the intonation here. They're just practicing the question formation. Elle est calme, il est intelligent, il est malade. And pupils responding have to yell out question or phrase, depending on what they hear from the intonation. We talked about not only doing questions in speaking and making sure that we can write questions as well. So this is an activity that pupils do, responding to what they can see, responding to the question that they're asked in this particular instance. Okay, I'm keen to show you all of the examples, but I think I'll need to move a little bit quicker. So here we've got something from year 7 German. We've got an interview with Sebastian Vettel. We've got the answers here, and students have to come up with the questions that could have given those answers. And then we can listen to the whole interview by clicking on Sebastian Vettel if we want to listen to the questions and answers, or we can just listen to the individual questions to check that pupils got them right. But after that, there are several possibilities then for using this beyond the reading, the writing, and we can go into listening and speaking. So we can have students turn away from the board and try and answer as Sebastian Vettel when we click the questions. And of course, you've got the option to click the questions in any order. They don't have to be in the order 1 to 6. Pupils could continue facing the board, but instead answer the questions for themselves. So they've got the support here of seeing some of the answer structures that they might want to use. They just need to then change the details. Or of course, they could differentiate for themselves, turn away from the board, but still answer for themselves. So there's quite a lot of variety in the way a task like this can be structured. We talked about written questions again. I think these are really important for just giving students the extra time that they may sometimes need to do what is something that's quite complex. So German perfect tense questions, which can translate always in 2 ways in English. So here we have, did I or have I, climb or climb. So did I climb or have I climbed? In the middle, you've got 8 possible sentence fillers. And the whole way that the slide is laid out is to try and structurally support word order, because students are doing quite a lot here. They have to know the past participle, they have to know whether the verb goes with sein or haben, and they have to then recognize from what's in the middle what should go there, because it's not, only one thing fits. So bin ich ins Kanu gestiegen. This is early perfect tense question formation. So you've got that structural support, but they're still doing quite a lot of independent work. So did you travel? Students have to know that is gefahren. They have to know that it goes with sein. They have to know the part of sein that goes with you. And they have to pick out mit der Bahn as the bit in the middle. So again, quite a lot going on in this task. You get the idea. Here, another one at this, you can tell probably that this is one of my absolute favorites, giving the answers and having students come up with the questions, particularly once you've done a whole range of different questions. So we're leaping ahead here towards the end of year 8. So that in terms of years is 12, 13 years old. And students have learned the present tense, the perfect tense, and the future tense by this point. And you can see that there's quite a variety of question types that they are able to form, or we are expecting them to be able to form. Obviously, there's a listen and check to hear whether they got the answers right. Ooh, we don't want to hear that now. Of course, then taking it on further to, again, it's structured, but quite independent structured creation. They have to write their own interview questions here. And of course, the nice thing about writing interview questions is that then there's a very natural context for role playing that and pretending that students are that singer or are that person and being interviewed. It always seems to work really well. Okay, so slightly freer production would follow all of that. So after the planning the sequencing, after the explanation, after the input practice in listening and reading, after the very structured practice in speaking and writing, we would then get some freer production. And obviously it's going to be appropriate to age and stage. So we've got here pupils learning about items in a school bag. They get to choose a school bag that they want to be theirs, and their partner has to discover by asking questions which bag their partner has chosen. So again, yes, there's some structure to it, but there's also some choice in there. And notice that there's no help in terms of the actual vocabulary. Pupils are having to create the question by themselves, at least it is only one question, but also understand and respond to the answers. So jumping back to German Key Stage 3, here we might still want an element of structure. We might want to make sure that we're encouraging students to use the full range of structures that they've been learning, because if you take a question, if you take the structure out completely, you might end up sort of reducing the breadth of what students can say and can practice saying. So sometimes we still want to give a steer. So in brackets, we're not telling them what their opinions are. Of course, they're going to give their own opinions, but we are encouraging them to use particular structures when they do it. So in those kind of scenarios, if we're giving the answers, and this was a written task, we can only go so far. We can only essentially do the first bit, and then students have to do the rest of it themselves, and there'll be a plethora of different answers, of course. Okay, similar one here, asking about happiness. The whole week has been focused on things that make people happy, and looking at that in terms of the research on happiness, and also happiness in different countries and which countries peoples are happiest. So there's been quite a lot of interesting input, but by the end, pupils are then reflecting and asking each other questions about what makes them and their near ones happy. Just a quick couple of thoughts on spontaneity. So the Pedagogy Review says this about spontaneity: sometimes we have meaningful contexts where things arise spontaneously in the classroom and previously unknown language comes to the fore, and it increases the need to understand because it's a very immediate situation. We should be alive to those. And one of the things that I would say is that having taught questions so carefully, we should expect that students will begin to initiate spontaneously in the classroom with simple language. And I saw this on Twitter recently, somebody being really quite encouraged by a student prompting and initiating with something relatively simple. And we shouldn't expect that students will initiate with something incredibly complex. They're only able to use spontaneously the language that they really know well. But if we have taught them this language really well, we should expect that it will start coming out in spontaneous moments when they feel the need to communicate. And that is indeed, well, that's been my experience. In order to facilitate that, then, we want to teach clarification questions. We want to teach them the ability to ask for things, como se dice, and to tell us that they don't understand certain things, because that prolongs the interaction. And finally, to just lead on from that into the role of chunks then. I see a role for chunks in, and they can be very, very beneficial when they lead to more interaction. So in these scenarios where students want to say something and they want to say como se dice, or they want to ask for clarification about something and say that they've got a problem or say that they don't understand. And so those typical chunks that I'm thinking about are things like, is it such and such? How do you spell? Can you repeat, please? I don't understand. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think this is one I would teach early. I think such and such, and you, what do you think? Ways to prolong interactions and get more out of your interaction. Just keep it going for longer. I do think, though, that we need to have very, very simple and clear component parts that beginner learners will be able to identify, and soon they'll be able to use those. We know from research that not all students can break chunks down without explicit instruction. And so we need to be mindful of that when we think about the chunks that we want to put into our teaching. Okay, so I'm aware of time being quite short. I want to signpost the fact that the primary resources that I've exemplified here are on my website. There are now 2 schemes of work for Spanish and 2 schemes of work for French on the website. I'm not taking the old ones down, I'm leaving those for people, but the new ones are the ones with colors. So red, yellow, blue, and green. French and Spanish are there. German will be there from next September. That's going to take a little while longer. And if you would like this presentation and any secondary resources that I've shown within it, those are available on the NSELP website. On the news events link, it's not there yet, but should be there. These presentations from the language show should be obviously there, signposted from tomorrow. And if you found any of this interesting, new, or given you food for thought, and you teach in this country, I have to say, you are really welcome to apply to attend the NSELP course. You can see there that it's 5 sessions online, 2.5 hours, so you don't have to travel anywhere. There's a range of days and times, and the 5 sessions are curriculum design, phonics, vocabulary, grammar, meaningful practice. A lot of the ideas that I've been talking about today will be picked up and explored in more detail in those sessions. So I really warmly recommend that course to you. It's free, so you might enjoy it. Now, I don't think got any questions in the chat. So questions in the Q&A. If there are any questions, Jonathan's going to cut me off when my time is finished anyway. So if you do have a question, I would post it quickly now. Oh, Cecile, hi. Thank you. It's also very strange when you can't see anybody. So I've just seen something on the chat. Oh, we do need to wind up now, Jonathan is saying to me. Okay, so I need to say thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day. Do I have a link to the PowerPoint? Yes, from tomorrow. It will be on the NSELP website. I don't have the link yet, but if you go to the NSELP website tomorrow, you will see it. Oh, okay. So I'll get rid of that. If you go to that link tomorrow, you'll find it. I'm gonna let this go now because the room will be occupied very, very soon, and we need to move on with the next session. So thank you very much, and bye to you all.